And thank you for the invitation to join Shape Your Future with SPU today. I'll be focusing on conflict studies at St. Paul University, what a student may learn by joining us to study here. Certainly different approaches among faculty within the department will be mentioned, but I'll be focusing, because of limited time today, on just one area. I can, of course, thereafter, after the introduction and the focus on workplace conflict, talk about other possible areas of interest according to student questions as we go today. So why would someone want to study conflict? What is the interest or value in studying conflict? Well, first, someone may want to understand where conflict comes from. What's the meaning of it for human societies? And how can we generate solutions, new processes to reconcile after people have faced a conflict, to help heal the harms and damage in a society or community after a conflict? And how can we implement and create structural change in order to mitigate conflicts more effectively in the future? We can examine the connections between conflict, violence, social justice, and conflict resolution and peace-building techniques in human communities. We can help students acquire the attitudes, knowledge, and research that they need in order to analyze causes of ethnic and religious conflict, and in the long term to cultivate peace in global communities. At St. Paul, you can learn to combine a social science orientation with philosophical, ethical, and theological approaches. And I think this is something that's quite unique about the program. Most conflict studies programs within North America or Europe will, of course, have a social science orientation. But at St. Paul, this combination of ethical and philosophical approaches as well, and theological approaches, helps to make our program unique. Faculty areas of specialization will help students learn about ethnic and religious dimensions of conflict in Canada, but also abroad, as well as practical approaches to conflict resolution in the workplace, in the community, and in family settings, as well as in post-conflict zones where perhaps there has been a war or period of violence, inter-religious, interfaith tensions, and now there's an opportunity to rebuild and help a community recover from that. So our faculty areas of specialization will range across all of those areas. Today, however, I'm going to speak specifically more about practical approaches to conflict management and the kinds of skills students can develop to pursue careers, perhaps as an ombudsman or in complaint management. So just one possible area of interest for future SPU students would be managing conflict in the workplace. So why does organizational or workplace conflict matter? Why is it important? Well, workplaces that are conflict-ridden or suffering from a number of conflicts will have lowered worker productivity. Stakeholders might leave an organization voluntarily. They could face termination for behaviors that come up, unfortunately, in conflicts. There can be formal complaints made from one worker to another, to a manager, to an owner. We can see increased mental and physical health problems as well. Lawsuits in extreme cases can be pursued against private or public sector employers. Negative media attention. Some of the worst conflicts we have seen in large organizations in recent years have led to reputational damage of private companies, of universities, of governments, because of conflicts that were occurring in departments. And then that negative reputation is not only something that's temporary, that will subside when the media attention goes away, but there can be long-term impacts of reputation loss, including financial instability, lower rankings, a permanently or semi-permanently damaged reputation of an organization, and recruitment problems, because generally people don't want to go work or study in an area that's known for conflict. What companies and governments and crown corporations and universities have learned is that it's effective to have good in-house conflict management, or to have recourse to consultants who are able to help informally resolve conflicts before they have to go to the courts. Public and private sector employers have learned that this is less expensive and, more importantly, more effective in the long term. So what we have seen in particular is a lot of growth in the ombudsman profession. I'll talk about that more in a moment, but ombudsman or ombuds or ombudsperson roles are increasing across governments in North America, in Europe, in Latin America, in Africa, and in most regions of the world at the moment, not only in the public sector, but also corporate and nonprofit sectors. And this increasing number of jobs, of course, means a lot of opportunities for students who have the skills to join those positions, to take on those positions after they earn a university degree. So the ombudsman role, for people who are not familiar with it, has several key points for any organization. This includes legislative ombuds who can be working within government, but also organizational ombuds who are working much more broadly. Let's say, as I mentioned, higher education sector, nonprofit sector, and corporate sector. So an ombudsman will offer advice and support on conflict resolution, policy and procedure, or discipline issues that an employee or member of an organization may face. We provide appropriate dispute resolution services, ADR. This is also sometimes called alternative dispute resolution services, but the acronym stays the same. Conflict resolution coaching. So that's more of a one-on-one approach to help someone learn to manage conflicts more effectively themselves so that they navigate those issues more effectively, avoid conflicts, or manage them better in the future. Facilitated dialogue, which is kind of like a mediation, but it's even more informal. Mediation, shuttle diplomacy, and restorative practices. I'll speak a little bit more about each of these approaches later. An ombuds also acts as an advocate for fairness and equity in an organization. So it's not only a question of client service, customer service, if you prefer. It's also about organizational, structural, or systemic change. So by doing that, you learn to make recommendations to an organization to help them put in better policies, better procedures, so that conflicts are mitigated more effectively. You help improve the collegial relationship between stakeholders, and those policy recommendations to decision makers are all the way up to senior management in an organization. You learn to conduct appreciative inquiries, which are sometimes called informal fact-finding investigations as well. So an ombudsman serves as an impartial, or I prefer multi-partial, third party to any conflict in an organization. So why multi-partial? It's the idea that when you're an ombuds, you are learning to understand every perspective in a dispute and to helping every person in a conflict understand one another so that you can build bridges between different interests, different perspectives, and help people tell a new story of the conflict to work together more effectively. You serve as a source of information and guidance on regulations and policies, conflict resolution options, appeal and complaint processes, and referrals to other services. And of course, if you're working as an ombuds legislatively or organizationally, your services are always free and confidential. You maintain independence from management, from unions, and from any associations in your organization. That independence is incredibly important because it helps ensure that your advice is not affected by any disputes within the hierarchy of the organization. And you're maintaining accessibility for all staff and applicable stakeholders within the organization, not only employees, but it could be members of an association or a union, could be students within a higher education setting. You're learning to ensure that your office and your services are in a physically accessible area and available also at a distance. I would add this point that certainly since the pandemic, the need for online distance conflict resolution services has grown. And this is something certainly in my own courses that I help students develop as well in terms of how you manage conflicts somewhat differently when they're online compared to, say, coaching someone in person or doing a mediation in person. There's a growing need for practitioners who are able to do both. And those are certainly skills that you can acquire with us here. So a little bit more specifically on each of these conflict resolution methods. Conflict management coaching is a one-on-one approach where we pull in different resources on types of coaching that are used in workplaces, help students not only learn the main research on coaching, but also practice these methods in a classroom setting that will imitate the kinds of issues that they would see in a workplace. Coaching can help an individual client learn to have the skills that they need, not simply to prevent conflicts from affecting their work, but when conflicts inevitably do come up, managing them more effectively in a way that actually can turn it into a positive event where every party can learn from what has happened and work together better in the future. What we want within any organization is not just to have a place where people can go to resolve a conflict, but develop the skills themselves where conflict isn't something that's scary, something that they try to shy away from. Mediation skills, of course, are important to develop. We see different types of mediation. We cover different types of mediation that are available: interest-based mediation, for example, narrative mediation, to cite another type. And you'll learn the differences between these approaches to mediation, and then look at practical ways of applying them in the workplace, but also in other settings. Shuttle diplomacy, or sometimes called shuttle mediation, is a type of mediation between parties who may have been in conflict for a long time and don't necessarily want to sit in the same room with one another. So an ombudsperson might be acting as a sort of go-between, shuttling between parties in conflict. This is an important skill to have for organizational conflict management as well. Restorative practices, more commonly, you may have heard in the media or elsewhere about restorative justice, but certainly in the toolbox that an ombudsman needs to acquire, learning restorative practices such as conflict circles, many of which are rooted in indigenous practices in North America and elsewhere. These sort of restorative approaches are in high demand and certainly useful to explore for conflict studies students who want to pursue careers in practical dispute resolution. And then finally, we look at ways that students can navigate complex policy networks to advance systemic change and peace building in any organization or community. Lastly, I would say, today we've spoken about just one area of focus that a student might want to have for their future career that might lead them to study in conflict studies here at SPU. However, as I mentioned at the outset, there are many different angles to conflict, and what makes this program unique is that it isn't a purely social science orientation to the study of conflict. At St. Paul, we combine ethical and theological approaches with social sciences, and students, I believe, confidently come out of our program, whether it be at the undergraduate level, master's level, or PhD level, with a wide array of knowledge and a deep understanding of the root causes of conflict and different approaches to resolving it that are quite unique here in the North American context. So.